Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last webinar of the year. This is an exciting one. Thank you all for being here. My name is Helen Schroeder. You may have seen my email pop up in some of your inboxes. I'm the marketing coordinator for Sigma Assessment Systems, and I will be your co-host for this webinar today. And with me, I have my colleague, Dr. Ruby Nadler. She will be presenting, and I can say from our practice sessions, you are in for a treat. For those of you who are new to Sigma Assessment Systems, we are a professional service firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and psychological assessments. And it's primarily for organizations like you looking to build their internal talent pools. Sigma has been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have a lot of experience, and we're thrilled to be sharing it with you today. And today we will be talking about leader character. Before we get started, a couple of announcements. We have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Ruby will walk you through our webinar content to introduce you to leader character and give you some handy tips and tools for applying it in your organizations. As we go, feel free to post any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom. We will collect those as we go and then leave about 10 minutes at the end to go through them together. If more questions come up live during the Q&A, you can keep posting them there. And anything that we don't get to throughout the session, feel free to send us an email. We are recording this session, and we will be sharing a recording with you in a follow-up email tomorrow. And you will also get a copy of the slides, so no need to take notes. And again, please don't hesitate to use that Q&A box. We want the session to be interactive. You can always follow up, but that's what the Q&A box is there for, so don't be shy. All right, and now let me introduce you to Ruby, and we can get started. So Dr. Ruby Nadler is a specialist in cognition and perception with expertise in the areas of leadership character, mindfulness, and positive psychology. With a passion for fusing scientific research and practical application, Ruby excels in enhancing leadership performance and emotional intelligence through individual coaching and group workshops, kind of like this today. She's been recognized for her expertise as the recipient of the Ontario Centres of Excellence Talent Edge Fellowship, and her groundbreaking research has been featured on platforms such as CBC, BBC Radio, Happify, and NPR. So Ruby, thank you very much for being with us today. I'll turn it over to you now to get started.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks everyone for joining us today. For some of you may have attended a prior webinar I gave at the beginning of the year, and now we're wrapping up the year talking about how to really apply character strengths at work, which is, other words, is all about how to bring out the best in yourself and the people that you work with. So today I'll be sharing an introduction to leader character that may be new for some of you and maybe a refresher for those of you that are familiar with the leader character framework. And then I'll be building on that and talking about character strengths and the science of them. So what they are and how good they are and how really underused that they can be. And then we'll be talking about how to bring your strengths forward and help other people to bring theirs forward. And I'll be sharing a resource with you and a practice that you can use at work. So this is the leader character framework. And as you can see here, so if it's new to you, it consists of 11 dimensions. So those are the words that are in bold. So judgment, transcendence, drive, etc. So there are 11 dimensions in this framework, and there are 62 elements that you'll notice below. So there are several underneath each of the dimensions. And this framework was created due to the need to be able to talk about what leader character is and how to develop it. So this framework was developed in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis by a group of professors at the Ivy School of Business. So they went around the world to the major business centers, so the UK, Hong Kong, and North America, and talked to leaders about what had happened in the crisis, so what was going on. And they asked the question, would character have helped, right? Like, or could anything have been done to mitigate the crisis? And senior business leaders all pointed to character for the most part, but they were sort of skeptical that anything could be done to change character for the better. So the professors sought to just find out if that was even true. And over the course of a few years, they did a lot of research and they created this framework based on that. This framework is also based on research that goes as far back as Aristotle and Plato. So it goes very far back. There's always been, not always, but there's been a lot of discussion about character and the importance of character. And character is really the traits, values, and virtues that are good for yourselves and are good for other people. So it's traits, values, and virtues expressed as behavior that are good for us and good for other people. So we'll be exploring this framework and working with it to identify character strengths and how we can work with it to enhance engagement in the workplace. But there's a few things I want to share first. So the first thing you might notice if this is new to you is that judgment is at the center of the framework. And that's because judgment plays a dual purpose in this framework. So judgment is not only its own character strength and obviously a central one, and that's why it's placed at the center, but it's also there because judgment acts sort of like an air traffic controller, dialing up and dialing down the other dimensions. So you need to use your judgment in all situations where you're calling upon leader character. So that's why it's there. So judgment helps you to notice what needs to be done in a given situation to optimize the outcome for everybody. Another thing to know about the framework is that you might just see, the framework just shows the words, the descriptive words for the dimensions and the elements, but each dimension and each element actually exists on a spectrum from overuse to underuse. And so what we're looking to do when we draw upon leader character is to identify that optimal balance, that optimal usage of each of the dimensions and elements. So for instance, someone who wants to bring forward bravery in a situation has to be careful to walk that balance between being reckless and just jumping in and not doing anything at all, right? Which would be cowardly. So we're talking about character strengths today, and I'll talk a little more about balance and what that means, but that's something to understand that can be really helpful. So we're not saying to only be brave in a given situation. We're talking, it's a little more nuanced than that. Another thing that's a little different, if you're more familiar and have worked with competencies, which I would assume everybody has, is that in this framework, all of the dimensions matter. So for individuals and for organizations, you can't just select a few that you want to focus on, although that's common and not a terrible place to start. But the idea is that if there's a real gap or a lack of a given dimension, there will be negative repercussions based on that. So all of the dimensions matter, and they're all interrelated as well. And then finally, character is always being expressed in our behavior. So that's something really important to understand. So those elements that are below each of the dimensions, they may be hard for you to read right now, but they're worth looking at. And each one of them is meant to show a given behavior. So for someone who wants to show a lot of courage, you can look at those elements for ideas about, well, what does courage look like? So it looks like someone who is brave and determined, tenacious, resilient, and confident. And the idea is that you can express those elements through your behavior. And the more of those elements that you express, the stronger the more strongly courage will show up in your behavior. So they're meant to be descriptive and helpful ways. And just to really keep the conversation, the concept focused around, it's one thing to say that you have a good character, right? And we all think of ourselves as good people, but it's another thing to really show up the way that you want to show up. And so the idea with this framework is that it's based on your behavior. And as such, even if you don't feel particularly courageous, or even if you feel like maybe you're not naturally someone who has a lot of humility, these are things that you can develop and you can show them through your behavior. And if you're interested in using this framework, which I encourage you to do, and that's why I'm talking about it today, one of the best things that you can do to get familiar with the framework and all of those 62 elements and the 11 dimensions is to start to pay attention to people's behavior, your own and other people's. And it's easier to start with looking at other people. So we're going to do that in a second. So this practice is called character spotting. And it's a way to help you recognize, what does character look like in other people? How can I know someone is expressing those dimensions. So I'm going to give us all a few examples and just talk about how character shows up. So the first one, if you don't recognize this picture, this is Rosa Parks. And she said, so it's really amazing. You can, I can fill in a little bit of background. So Rosa Parks obviously played a really critical role in the American Civil Rights Movement. And you can spot character obviously in people's actions, but I can't show you people's actions. So we're just going to read some quotes from famous people that have made a real impact on the world. So she said, I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. So I just want you to sit with that for a moment and think about what character dimensions are shown through that quote. And, you know, given that this is someone who really pushed the civil rights movement forward. So a couple of really key dimensions come out, right? The first one, so she's talking about fear, and fear is really related to courage and to bravery, right? And most people who have done really courageous things fully admit that it's not about feeling the fear, it's about acting in the face of fear, right? That's what makes it brave. That's what makes someone courageous. So Rosa Parks showed a huge amount of courage and bravery in the face of her fear when she refused to move in the bus in the southern United States. So that is a real example of courage in real life. Another thing that stands out to me, and I've worked with a character obviously for a lot longer than some of you maybe, is that this quote shows a lot of determination as well. So it shows, which comes from drive. So she used a lot of drive and a lot of courage to stand up for what was right and to make a real difference. Here we have Socrates, so a famous philosopher. And he said, one of his famous quotes is, "An unexamined life is not worth living." So just again, take a moment to think about what does he epitomize and what is his quote getting at? What character strength underlies it? So a lot of people associate Socrates and other philosophers like Aristotle and Plato with wisdom, right? And the judgment dimension is actually based upon that tradition of so-called practical wisdom. So Socrates showed obviously a lot of judgment and spent his life thinking and philosophizing. And then we have Mr. Fred Rogers. So here he's saying there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. And the third way is to be kind. And so this one is pretty straightforward. But the point I'm trying to make is that we can see character in people's behavior. And we also associate character strengths with people who have made a difference in the world. So if you look at anyone who has made a mark on the world and you think about them, and you can do this for leaders, you can do this for people in your life, but it's easiest to see clearly at first with people that we already have that are famous and where it's really strong, right? Is Mr. Rogers was known for his huge amount of compassion and empathy, particularly towards children, right? Through his show. So yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that character strengths are something we can always tune into, and doing that is really good. It's a really good practice if you want to work with character strengths and if you want to work with the leader character framework. So I hope that was helpful for you. So again, the practice that we just did a little bit of is called character spotting. So it can be helpful to keep, and I apologize, I didn't want to put the wheel on every picture. So I picked some really obvious ones, but you can use this framework and even print it out and just pay attention to the dimensions that you see throughout the day. when you're interacting with other people. So this is the key starting practice to get more familiar with using leader character and thinking about it. And now I want to talk, so I think I've started to talk a little bit about character strengths already. But one thing that you can do with the leader character framework that's really nice to do is to talk about character strengths. And so I'm going to talk about the benefits and how we can do that now. So character strengths are elements or dimensions of character that show up in our behavior that come forward really strongly and clearly. So I think each of these examples that I've used, that it's really obvious to me. So I hope it comes forward for you as well. So try to imagine a philosopher like Socrates without his judgment and his wisdom. Like if he couldn't use that character strength, he wouldn't stand out so much, right? Like that's what made him so notable. And likewise with Rosa Parks, her courage and determination is what has stayed with people, right? And what's made such an impression. And so character strengths, you can think about your own character strengths and other people's strengths. They are the traits, values, and virtues that come forward in a person almost effortlessly. So they're thought to be energizing, they're effortless, so they come forward easily, and they're essential to who you are as a person. So we're going to talk about how to use character strengths at work. And this is the first concept that's important to understand, is just what is a character strength? It's a dimension of character that really comes forward strongly. And a key question that can be helpful to ask yourself is, does this character strength feel like a part of who I am? So again, when we're looking at these examples, right? Could you imagine Mr. Rogers without his kindness and empathy? Like who would he be without that? Right? He would just be anyone. He wouldn't be famous for the work that he did, right? In helping children so much through his show, right? So it's really what makes people vibrant and energized and what comes forward in their behavior. And there's a lot of research on the benefits of character strengths. So you can think about how those strengths in those examples really fueled their life purpose and fueled their sense of purpose and what they were trying to do, right? And that's true for all of us. So there's a really rich body of research that has looked at character strengths in people in a variety of settings. So they've looked at it, I want to say almost literally anything you can think of, but they've looked at it at work, they've looked at it in schools, they've looked at it across the lifespan. And across the board, it's really safe to say that there are benefits for everyone to bring forward your character strengths and to be aware of them. So character strengths, people who are able to show character strengths and are aware of their character strengths, but even if you're not aware of them, just when they've researched this, people who show a lot of character strengths have better relationships, they're flourishing, they tend to be happier and more engaged with their lives. And there are even benefits to physical health. And the reason is, again, that character dimensions, like character, are things that are good for us and they're good for other people. So they literally bring benefits. And the reason is, if you break down what it takes to have a good relationship or to be happy or even physically healthy for a lot of us, right? It takes some work. And so the things that underlie those benefits rely on character. So strengths help us to meet our needs for autonomy, for our life purpose, and just to succeed and feel good in our life. So if you analyze anything even that you've accomplished, if you look at it, there will be character strengths underneath that. And some of you might be thinking, well, okay, we're talking about maybe confidence or self-esteem or self-efficacy. These benefits are beyond that. So character strengths really are something special and unique to us that we all can bring forward. But sadly, a lot of us don't get to bring our strengths forward. So I took a look at this year's survey data on stress levels and engagement. And it's not looking good. So a survey, so this, I'm citing some Gallup research that they survey thousands of people around the world, and the majority of employees that were surveyed, so thousands of people around the world that have a job, were asked, how stressed were you yesterday? 44% of them said that they were very stressed. And so if you ask yourself, how stressed was I yesterday? You might feel the same. And obviously this is really high. And that coincides also with a lack of engagement that I think has received a lot of attention in the last few years. So only 23% of employees are engaged in their roles. About half of people surveyed are looking to switch jobs, and some of those people are actively looking. So that doesn't paint a very good picture about how people are feeling in their jobs. And when you look at the reasons why, it's not hard to see, right? There's a lot of obvious reasons. And one thing that stood out to me is that a lot of workers feel that their organization doesn't care about their well-being. So obviously that can hurt, your engagement, and that's part of why people are stressed. Some separate research asked managers to name the strengths of their team, and only about a third of managers can name their employees' strengths. And we're not talking character strengths. So these people didn't necessarily know about leader character or any of that. It was just, do you know what your this employee, like, what are they about? What are they good at? So the majority couldn't name that. So there's a lot of room. There's a long way to go, obviously. And people are asking for more engagement, for more recognition, for clearer goals and better managers. So those are some of the things that people are saying would improve their experience at work. And obviously, character strengths use is not going to fix, some of the systemic, worldwide problems and the things that are happening in organizations right now that are not ideal. But character strengths are a relatively untapped resource that can benefit yourself if you find yourself in that group of people who feel maybe disengaged at work and stressed out. So character strengths are something that can be beneficial for you. And if you're a manager and you're looking for ways to engage your team and just improve the experience of work, it's some low-hanging fruit that you can use. So I'm going to talk about how to do that next. And there's research on this as well. So research shows that people who engage their strengths at work, and I'm talking about their character strengths at work, show better coping and stress resilience. They're more productive, and they're 6 times more engaged when they're using their strengths at work. So there's this really strong link between, using your strengths at work and feeling good about the work that you do. And it even leads to feeling like your work is a calling. And obviously some of those people are probably in roles that do just suit them. But this is a technique, the things I'm going to talk about can be shared regardless of the nature of your role and whether it's, the ideal fit for you. But yeah, the research is very clear that there is this link between strengths usage and being more engaged and really flourishing at work. So now I'm going to talk about how to use character strengths at work. And the first thing I want to do though is just talk. So I talked earlier about how each character strength exists on a continuum, right? From overuse to underuse. And it can be tempting sometimes to frame things negatively, right? Like, okay, well, I'm not enough, like, I don't have enough humility at work. And something in my work as a coach that comes up a lot in people who have a lot of work experience is this tendency to really want to showcase your expertise. And if sharing knowledge and if your judgment is high and your drive is high and you're a pretty confident person, there can be a tendency that develops over the years to take up a lot of space in meetings, right? And so the corollary to this idea of strength use is I'm not saying that, just let your strengths run wild all the time and only focus on them. But even in situations where you want to maybe tone down that drive and that confidence to, open up some space for other people, it's not helpful to make yourself or other people feel bad about what's happening. So that strengths perspective is still useful. So the idea here would be, okay, I understand about myself. I have a lot of passion. I've developed a lot of expertise and I feel comfortable. Like those are all really good things. The question is, how can I balance those things with some more, maybe some self-control, some temperance, and some collaboration. So when we talk about strengths use, again, it's not about going, full tilt with them. It's about that balance is still there. It's about that optimal use. But all of that said, working with strengths, there's a lot of benefits to it. So I will show that. I will show how to work with them next. So there are two pathways, right, to applying character strengths at work, and you might be drawn more to one than the other. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about how to develop character strengths for yourself, how to identify them, and how to use them more at work, and then how to apply them as a manager, or if you're in a leadership role, or even just if you want to work, if you want to apply what we're talking about with your colleagues, that can be something that you can do. So for yourself, the first thing that you have to do is to develop an awareness of your own strengths. Then reflect on your strengths and think about, what situations are they showing up in? How can I use them in new ways? And then actually remembering to do that. So that's what you can do for yourself. And then I'm going to talk through a process that you can use when working with other people. So Helen can share the link to the prior webinar if she hasn't done that already. I don't think she has. In the prior webinar I gave earlier in the year on character, I talked a little more at length about this, but basically, if you want to identify your strengths, if you want to work with leader character, right, these three processes are really key. So you need to have some self-awareness, right? And take a look at yourself and your behavior and how you show up. You have to engage in some deliberate practice, right? So that would be, today, I'm going to try to be more collaborative in this meeting that I have. I'm going to ask questions and show some humility. I'm going to try to watch for that tendency to, just give people the answers and not speak, not ask questions. And then self-reflection. So these things are interrelated and you can pretty much jump in anywhere you like. So in terms of, so one thing that will help you is to ask yourself, what are your strengths? So we're going to do a quick poll. You can select, I ask you to select maybe at least one if possible. But it would be nice, it's okay also to select a couple that come out strongly for you. So this is one of the first steps to engaging in some reflection about your character strengths and developing some more awareness of it. Okay, so we'll just give people a few more seconds to think about what their own character strengths are. And it's worth noting that they're not in a hierarchy, right? So they're all important. So this is just about thinking which ones show up the most easily for me and which ones feel like a part of who I am. Which ones would life be a little duller if I didn't get to use them? Okay, and so just give me a moment. So no one said that they weren't sure, which is really great. So that shows that people do have some awareness. 59% of you endorsed humility as one of your strengths. And that's maybe not surprising. I think that's more than average, but maybe not surprising in a group of people who are attending a webinar, right, to learn more about developing their self and others. Another really strong, the next strongest one was courage. So 41% of you said that you show a lot of courage, and that's tied with accountability. And accountability is one that tends to really show up strongly in workplace samples. And then there's collaboration and drive not far behind, and integrity all around 35%. So I'm assuming that that's a mix of everyone. And then 29% said transcendence, which is a great one, and one that we don't tend to get to use very often for most of us in our roles, right? So that's that strategic thinking, like that outside perspective and vision and creativity. And then 35% of you also endorsed justice. And then this, so judgment and temperance were the lowest. So 24% of you endorsed judgment, which is not surprising. And to me, it's very strongly related to temperance as well. So 12% of you feel like you have strong temperance, which is the ability to be patient and calm and composed and have self-control. And that lines up with all of the data that we've collected over the years with our character assessment. So, and it also aligns with research from around the world. So don't feel bad about that one. Self-control, temperance is the hardest. It's the hardest one to show because it relies on, right, controlling yourself in a, as you go about your day. And self-control is arguably a limited resource. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope my little recap was helpful for you. But yeah, thinking about what your strengths are is really helpful. Another activity that can be really beneficial is just engaging in self-reflection. And people have different ways to do that, obviously, but thinking about how have your past experiences shaped you, how do you want to show up, and who do you want to be? And it can feel a little awkward to engage in journaling, but it really is a research-based practice. So those are some questions that you can, write about for a few minutes at some point if you're interested in that. And there's a book called Return on Character by Fred Keel, and he found that CEOs who have engaged in self-reflection to the extent that they know the answer to those questions and understand how their past experiences have affected them, they actually ran healthier, greater ROI companies than CEOs who were not able to sort of connect the dots between their role models and how they wanted to show up and how they were showing up in the present moment. So it really is worthwhile to engage in that if that's something that you feel you don't have clarity around. So now I want to focus on how managers can reinforce character at work. The first thing that you might have noticed on the slide I showed earlier was the importance of role modeling. And so if you're in a leadership role and you want other people to show up, right, and be engaged, you have to walk your talk. And so I just want to note that people learn through observation. Workplace cultures are shaped through the behavior of everybody, but it starts at the top. And we also know that emotions and behavior can spread through organizations, can spread through, right, our social groups. So that's the first thing. So sometimes people aren't that excited about developing their character for themselves. They're like, I'm pretty good. But it can be helpful to take the perspective of how am I showing up and what am I showing to the other people in my organization? So that can be motivating. But in terms of some specific steps that I want to work through in the time that we have left, I want to talk through how to use character strengths at work for other people. So obviously role modeling, self-development is very helpful, but I really want to leave you with some things that you can take back and use with your team. So we did a character spotting practice earlier in the session, right? So looking at those quotes from famous people and thinking about their lives and the strengths that you can see. Character spotting is something that you can do throughout the day. I don't recommend you try to do it all the time, but taking a moment to just see other people with fresh eyes. So something of a beginner's mind, and just try to see people's behavior through that lens and ask yourself, what strengths might be underlying this behavior? So it can be interesting. So someone that can seem really inflexible or rigid, or is just focused on something very different from where you're trying to go. Just taking a moment to think about, like, well, what strengths are they showing? Maybe they have a very high sense of integrity. So maybe you're working with someone extremely principled and they just want to make sure that a certain process is being followed, right? So it takes them a little more time to adapt. Having that perspective, I find, can be really helpful. And again, the majority of managers don't do this and can't name their employees' strengths. So this is something worth people's time. So you can make a habit of looking for people's strengths. You can look in people's, daily routines and their habits. So what do those habits maybe say about them? And again, we're coming at this from a positive perspective. How are people under challenging situations? So it's the stressful situations where we see people's character showing up, right? And just, yeah, as I mentioned, their approaches to work can be helpful as well. So this is something that you can practice a little bit at a time, maybe when it just seems like a good time for you. So it's not meant to be something to add on in the midst of a stressful day. But if you are having trouble understanding someone or figuring out what would work in a given situation, a character-based approach can be really helpful for providing some new insights and ideas for how to either work with someone or how to solve a problem. If you're working with someone and you feel comfortable, or you are managing a team or someone that reports to you, it can be really helpful to provide feedback on their character strengths. So after you've taken, some thoughtful observation, and this is powerful because, first of all, if you go back to the idea that people are disengaged, people don't feel very good at work, people don't feel like they're recognized for who they are, this is a really good way to work to mitigate some of that. The other thing that's powerful is that 2/3 of people don't really know what their strengths are. So the average person doesn't have an awareness of a formal awareness of character strengths. And so there's all this untapped potential that, as a manager, as someone that works with other people, you can help them to appreciate about themselves. And when you give feedback, it should be, here are the best practices for feedback. So it should be timely, specific, and actionable. And so I've got some examples here. So people learn best and feedback is most helpful when it fairly closely follows a situation, right? Because once, if you bring up something from a year ago, if it was really salient, they might remember it. But generally, the idea is to just make a habit of providing consistent feedback, and character can tie into that practice. So I'm not saying that you have to do this all the time or every day, but it can really make someone's day, and it can really, again, help people to develop some awareness of their strengths. So these are just some ideas that go beyond, good job, great work. Let people know what it is that made it a good job, and what is it about their approach that made it good, right? So that really gives something for people to work with. And the third thing to do is to provide opportunities for people to use their strengths. So once you have noticed and observed people's character and reflected on it, started to provide feedback on it, it's also helpful to just think about how can people use their strengths more at work. And the reason is that there is, again, so much research on the benefits of doing this. So again, this is something you can apply to yourself. Again, if you feel like you're in a bit of a slump or have just gotten, into a certain zone at work and you'd like to shake things up a little bit, applying a strengths-based approach using character can be really helpful. So research has shown that people who were asked to use their character strengths in new ways every day for just 4 days were happier 6 months after the experiment was done. So these are some long-lasting effects that you can unlock through relatively simple means. So as a manager, thinking about people's strengths and how those strengths can be applied. So what situations could they use them in, and could they use them in new ways? So I've got a little checklist here for leaders, right? So again, the point is not to make you feel like there's so much you have to do, but more, look at all the stuff that there is that you could be doing and could just add to your repertoire of management techniques. And here are the benefits that will come from it, right? So remembering that we all influence the people around us, right, for better or worse, and striving to be good role models for each other. Looking for character in other people and seeing the best in other people and taking that lens even to challenging situations. Providing regular recognition of people's strengths and thinking about how people can apply their strengths to new situations. So maybe you have someone, maybe you're working with someone and you realize they really love collaborating, that they really light up when they get to work with other people. Well, maybe you could have them use those collaboration skills in working with other people, right? So obviously talk to them too, not just giving them more work, but let them know, right? Like, this seems to light you up. How can we use more of that? How can you get more of that, right? It really does work to make people enjoy their jobs more. And then coaching people to optimize their strengths. So again, if you're giving feedback to people and if you're working closely with people that report to you, right? You can talk about, how can we use this? What are the situations as optimal? And something that comes up in my coaching work is people who are really high on humanity. And they need to work on balancing it out because they can actually get burnt out. So it's not just about pumping it up. It can be about, how can we protect this skill that you have or protect this quality, but also, make sure that it's meeting your needs. And the result of doing all of this, right, will be that people have an awareness of their strengths, which we know is really good for engagement and flourishing. They'll understand the connection between their work and their strengths, which again, really good. And they'll feel recognized and appreciated for who they are. So all of this is really positive, and it's not something you have to do overnight. But it really ties into what we know about motivation and engagement. So these are 3 pillars that are necessary for people to feel happy and good in their jobs. So if you've ever been unhappy, you can look at these and think, yeah, all of these were missing, or maybe one of these. But autonomy, mastery, and connection are really important for that intrinsic motivation that's necessary to bring your full self to work and just be engaged. So autonomy is about having a say in what happens. So some choice in how work is performed, right? The opposite of being micromanaged. And not all roles offer the same autonomy as others. So some jobs are, less, there's just less room for people to, I'm going to choose how I'm going to solve this problem. They have to do a specific thing, but you can still support them in feeling some sense of control over their work. The other thing is mastery, right? So feeling good at their job. And a big part of that is receiving timely feedback, right? So that they can develop, and you can see where character strengths can tie into that, right? If I understand that I'm appreciated for bringing certain qualities into my role, I'm going to feel good about it, and I'm going to feel more competent than if I wasn't receiving that feedback, even if my behavior was the same. So it can really increase people's motivation. And then connection is really important, right? So going back to that, the survey data on how few people are engaged in their work, right? So only 23% of people are engaged in their work. What helps people to feel engaged is feeling like they make a difference. So some of the survey data that I've read over the years says that the thing that really matters the most is if someone feels like they could not show up to work and it wouldn't affect anything, like no one would care about them basically, or no one would miss them, right? That lack of connection and purpose is really, really demotivating, obviously, right? So again, tying character strengths appreciation into people's work, it really fosters stronger connections, it fosters greater flourishing, and it helps people to bring their whole selves to work. So character strengths really help to increase motivation and engagement. So understanding that connection is really helpful. So I'd like you to think about how you can get started using the character framework and character strengths. So there's a bunch of ideas here, and we're going to do a couple polls before I share an activity resource that you can use. But I hope this has provided some good food for thought. I wanted to ask people to think about, before we get into what people would like to do, just what are your development opportunities? So we've taught you all seem to have a good awareness of what your strengths were, but what are the character strengths that you maybe feel you don't call forward as often? And this can even be, so I mentioned a strength, right? Someone might have high humanity, but it's actually something that they want to focus on because it's leading to them overgiving, right? And burning out. So this may not be exactly the opposite of what we saw before, which is why it's interesting. So it's thinking about, am I too driven, right? Do I push people too hard? Um, for a lot of you were high in humility, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad about that. That's a great quality, but is that something you want to think about how you bring it forward? Maybe you need to develop some more confidence in certain situations so that you can, be a more effective decision maker. So just thinking about whether there's anything that resonates with you as something you'd like to work on. Okay, so we do have a little bit of the inverse happening. So half of you want to work on your temperance. None of you aren't sure. So I appreciate that this group seems to be really tuned into what they're thinking about all these different perspectives. So in order, it's temperance at 50%. Transcendence at 36%. And yeah, it can be hard. Transcendence is one that it can be hard to tune into in the midst of your busy day. Another one that's high is collaboration. So almost 30% of you want to work on collaboration. And I think the common denominator for a lot of these, this could be a whole other webinar, right? It's how do you find time to work on these things in the midst of the busyness? So I don't have any really quick answers today to give you, but it's in the prior session, I talked about the power of just thinking about situations where what strength do I want to bring forward right now? And I think that could be applicable here. So if you're in a situation where you want to be more calm and composed and show more temperance, so just kind of getting yourself ready before that situation happens and just thinking about some coping strategies can be helpful. Transcendence can often be trying to block out some time, right? To just pull your head out of the daily work and just think about purpose and the strategy and just, how things are going. So that's something really good to do, especially at this time of the year. So thank you for sharing those things. And I find I go through phases of which ones I want to work on. One thing I haven't mentioned up to this point is that the leader character framework that we've been working with is assessed in these two reports that we've developed. So we have a self-report version that just gives you questions that assesses how you think you're doing on those 11 dimensions and the 62 elements. And then we also have a 360 version. So if no one said they were feeling stuck, but if you were, or if you think it would be helpful, that's a helpful tool that you can use. We also have a lot of resources that you can use that stem from this framework. So we have various guides on our website, a lot of resources. Helen can link to the leader character series that we've developed that breaks down help for each of the 11 dimensions. So we're just talking about some of our development opportunities. I encourage you to check that link out here. So the Leadership Character Development Series is a freely available resource that has some tips and ways of thinking about each of those 11 dimensions. And then I'm going to share, end with a resource that again will be shared with you following the session that sort of encourages you to use that character spotting. But based on what I've shared today, are there any activities that you would like to try out? And you can select multiple options here. But yeah, are you feeling after this like you want to work on developing your own awareness for yourself before you try to apply it to other people? Or are you excited about the possibilities of bringing character strengths to your team? Okay, so let's see. So a lot of you, so yeah, a mix, which is great and I think really realistic, right? So most of you want to reflect on how you can use your strengths at work, right? Because we are a part of those statistics, unfortunately, right? We can all struggle with our own engagement or be affected by what's happening in the world and in our organization, right? So that's a good place to start. And I hope that what we've covered today has given you some ideas. And again, we have resources that can help you to do that as well. And then closely following that, there's giving more appreciation and feedback to people, right? And if any of you can recall a time when someone has just reflected back to you what they see and appreciate about you, it's really nice. It's a really nice practice to do. And it's free. It just takes a little vulnerability, right? And then thinking about how to create opportunities for character strengths in people's roles and projects. So this is a good time of year to do that, or maybe in the new year, something to return to if you're just trying to wrap things up right now. So thank you for participating in that. I've created a leader character development activity that we can share with you following the session. And it just has the framework listed there on the first page, and then just walks you through some questions to help you identify people's strengths. And this can be a really helpful way to set up some feedback and just develop that habit of looking for character and applying it in the workplace. So yeah, thank you very much. We'll see if anyone has some questions now.
Thank you, Ruby. That was a great session. We are coming close to the end, but conveniently, we've only got one question here for you, and that is whether some of the character dimensions are more important than others. If you had to narrow it down, start with a few, is there any that are absolutely more important?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it depends on the context and for what purpose. So the strongest thing that I've read in the research is the benefits of kind acts. So people who report doing good things, like being kind to others, report the greatest life satisfaction and happiness. So Mr. Rogers was definitely onto something there. We also know that people who are kind to themselves are better able to reach their goals. So I think the dimension of humanity doesn't get as much attention sometimes as some of the other ones. And obviously there are tie-ins with collaboration and things like that, but humanity really comes out in the positive psychology literature as this is something really good to bring forward, good for yourself and good for other people. But they really do all matter. And at an individual level, what matters is appreciating yourself for who you are and thinking about how to apply your strengths. So that's the most important takeaway, I think.
Thank you. I'll also share a resource for you. It's on how we can balance leader character dimensions that our team has put together. Very helpful. Depending on what your strengths are, you might choose different ones that you'd like to focus on developing because they can function sort of like a teeter-totter and balance each other out. So you can take a look at that. A question just popped up. Is there a reference list for the presentation? Yes, we can get that to you. I'll make sure that we include that in the follow-up email. And one more quick one here about the LCIA. Don't we tend to assess ourselves by saying that we're self-aware, but assessments won't really reflect the real us because we're not quite as self-aware as we think we are?
That's a good question. Yeah, certainly. We all have our blind spots. And so I also encourage you, if you're serious about developing your character, is to think about the feedback you've gotten from other sources. So the LCIA itself is a good place to start, but it's not meant to be a complete answer to that reflective work. It's a starting point. And it provides the awareness of the framework and how to work with it. But absolutely, ask your friends, ask your mom, ask your spouse, ask the people that know you, right? And that care about you, but also aren't afraid to tell you what they think your development opportunities might be. So those are the so-called loving critics. So yeah, find your loving critics and talk to them.
Ruby also shared that the LCIA has a 360-degree version. We highly recommend that you take a look at that, not just the self-assessment. It's the same assessment, but it gets people who are in management or direct report or peer positions to also fill those surveys out so that you get a more holistic view of your leader character. Okay, and with that, we are going to finish up. Just in closing, I'd like to launch a quick poll to ask if anyone is here to get professional development credits for ATD. If you could just indicate that on the poll here, that would be great. And for everyone else, we will have our webinars for 2024 up next week. So please head on over to our events section of the website and take a look. If there's something that you'd really like to see that isn't in there, send us an email. We want these sessions to be practical for you, and we want to incorporate the topics that you're looking to get some information about. So please don't hesitate to reach out regarding that, or also if you have any follow-up questions on the information or resources that were shared in the webinar today. Once you close out of this webinar, you'll see a feedback survey pop up. We do look at every response on that, and we adjust our sessions based on what people are saying. So if you could take a minute to let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, that would be much appreciated. And with that, I will close the poll. Thank you all for your feedback. And thank you, Ruby, for being here today. It's a pleasure having you with us.